Welcome to our budget meeting slash special meeting. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Set up so many chairs.
Pauletta Friday.
Here.
Judy Boucher.
Here.
John Green.
Here.
Scott Latham.
Here.
Brian Tobin.
Here.
In the event of an emergency, visitors are advised that they may exit this room from the one side door which leads directly into the parking lot. In the event of emergency, everyone is asked to move away from the building and do not attempt to use in your automobiles, since this may cause traffic problems and block incoming emergency vehicles.
Thanks, Patty. We have two items we have to take care of, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Morrow. We have a SECRA resolution regarding the roof repairs. I don't need to read this whole thing, do I?
Nope.
It's available if anybody wants it.
Yep.
Is there, do you have to do roll call on these, or no? Okay, is there a motion for that resolution? Was that Scott or John? Scott.
Scott.
Second?
Second.
Second, Brian, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And then we have a repair reserve. We have an emergency roof repair that needs to be taken care of on the middle school down that way, high school, middle school area. This fund from this will come from the repair reserve, so there won't be any impact to the budget or to the taxpayers. I'm not going to read it. If anybody wants it, it's available. Any questions? I'm just so tired of roofs in this place. Okay, is there a motion?
So moved.
Judy, second?
Second.
Brian? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Now we will turn this meeting over to you for your budget presentation. Mr. Scheid, whoever's taking it
So
over.
I'll hand it over to Mr. Scheid, and I think he's going to ask us all to come to that side so we can see the PowerPoint.
Got it.
Great. And it's all yours, Chuck.
Everybody said tissue.
You do have a copy of
Turn
it?
mine, I hope I turned mine on. That's a big screen.
The little one is,
Nobody likes the front row. I was fascinated. Oh, I imagine you were.
I was.
I think I was always in the back, unless I went in high water.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. So it's my pleasure to present our first PowerPoint for the proposed 2022-23 school budget year. Dr. Morrow and I met with the department heads over the last couple of months. Individually, we went through their budget, their codes, and just kind of went through what their, wants, needs were. I tell you, this year's budget, to me, went together very smoothly. I'll go through some of the, of course, any of the large items or items that are kind of unique, but like I said, there's actually very few. Went very smoothly this year, I thought. So a couple of key things were within the tax cap as proposed. I'll go through the details. This upcoming budget is basically assuming the same programs and staffing that we currently have, so it's a roll forward budget. Right now, our estimated budget-to-budget increase is 1.99%. It actually was an accident, and I didn't really shoot for 2%. It's just how it worked out. It still mentioned we still have the 2 security guards, one at each building. And now I'm going to get into, again, some of the health insurance, which is, we're creeping on $5 million as a budget line for health insurance, which is it's really kind of pretty amazing. So, of course, when that fluctuates, it's kind of a big deal. I'm actually happy to say it's 4.7% is the projected increase in the health insurance premiums. For a little while, we thought it was 10%, but like I said, so with the pandemic, I was a little concerned with the health insurance, but like I said, I think I'm actually pretty happy it's the 4.7%. Another line item, a decent dollar amount for the individuals who are in the teacher's retirement system. We pay for every dollar of earnings, we pay monies into their pension. Next year, it's projected to go up 5%, from 9.8% to 10.29%. Again, that rate's based on the average, it's based on the stock market, how that pot of money does. Luckily, what is that?
Isn't that an only 1% increase, not a 5% increase, from 9.8 to 10?
No, 5% of 9.8 equal 10.29.
Oh,
Right, to go from 9.8 to
okay,
5%. I'm going to say, when I get into it, we have a reserve for the teacher retirement system, so that helps us defray to me, anything over 2%, we would need help. So we have that reserve that I'll get into to help, which we can use as a revenue item in the budget to offset that cost. We'll get into detail. I know next week we're planning the administrative meeting with more detailed line by programs. We'll also get into but right now, our transfer to capital line. So that's a transfer we do for capital projects. We're up to $110,000 in next year's budget. The current year is about $50,000. So those are, talk about the potential projects. But we'll talk, Dr. Moore and I have met with it. We're going to talk the long-range plan, what our theory is because we have a bond that's going to be paid off in 13 years or so. And we'll have to see if there's a discussion, do we need to increase our transfer to capital line, do our projects instead of bonding it? So this way you don't have to, for 15, 20 years for taxpayers. It's usually the normal way to go. But like I said, I think we're at a good point. We can discuss that transfer to capital line each year and kind of set up projects. It's just a different option. Again, we can get in much more detail. It's to make sure everybody's on the same page. But just right now, that's where that stands.
but when the money's then utilized from the capital, voters have to approve it, correct?
In other words, right. So once if it's in this budget and we discuss it, that's the approval for voter approval. So really, the voters approved the total budget, and they technically approved that transfer to capital line.
Right, but they don't approve the expenditure.
No.
They have to approve
This is
the
this is approving 110,000 because now we're going to talk about projects.
Then there needs to be voter approval. So if we
Right.
want to take out of the capital reserve to do capital projects, when you put when you put monies into capital in your budget, and when your budget is voted through, you're approved to use
So
those on
this isn't going into the
projects.
capital fund, this is going into the capital line in the
This is
general
the
budget.
capital line in the general budget,
But it's going into the
Not in
capital projects
reserve,
fund.
But not in the capital reserve.
not in reserve.
Not capital reserve, which is money that's, we
Okay.
capital reserve, we build up the reserve in the
Okay.
general fund, but we spend it, and we spend it in the
Yeah, that's a
capital.
little- Okay,
I know, it's always, because it's two different
a little
places where the
tricky, right.
capital money goes,
Right.
basically.
Right,
There's the one, the capital reserve, or when you fund that for the big projects you need approval on.
Exactly.
But you can also, in your general fund, move money into capital and use it that year.
exactly.
for projects.
For
Right.
projects that are not
Um,
repaired.
Roof projects.
Right.
you know,
But so that should say, well, it doesn't say capital repair.
Just a capital fund.
Yeah,
It's
there
not
should,
repair, it's-
yeah, no.
Well, it can be
repair.
improvement, but it just is a different kind of improvement, right?
Chuck, could you just reiterate for anybody who might be watching this on tape? Bullet 4 is 2 full-time security guards, 1 in each building, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Right, one security guard at each building. As things come up, sometimes we have them for added events, but the point also, we
Yeah, that
we don't
should-
have it, it's for school
But
days.
that should be reworded, I think, is the point Scott and
That
Brian
looks like you
made.
have 2 guards at each building.
Oh, you're right, I'm sorry. So, right, we have
Say
but one full-time, one at
useful,
each.
right.
And you said, we use them for events too?
Right, for certain events, but we don't have a lot of money in budget. It's basically 180 school days.
Right.
But on occasion, we'll have to do budget transfers, or there's some money in the code, but there's not a lot extra to have a part-time person, or, it's for a couple of the main events that might need extra support. But point, again, right now, it's fairly solid just for the 2 guards.
And those guards are not employees, we do that through a service, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's
Yes.
important to note as well,
Yes.
that it's through a contract with service, they're not employees. Right, and legacy costs and all that.
So we start on these next few slides, I kind of make sure, budget to budget, you're kind of locked in, but I think it's important to see where we are financially to kind of show how we kind of gear things. So just a couple items, our unassigned fund balance, which is we're capped at 4% of the budget, the following year's budget. That's kind of your rainy day funds, and right now we are at the max. The $1.2 million is 4% of the budget. Again, those for any unknown, unforeseen, it helps with cash flows, it helps lower our bond ratings, our borrowings. appropriated fund balance is a tricky concept. That's how much we have in our budget to give back to the taxpayers each year. So right now, we're roughly at the 1%. It fluctuates 300, 350, back and forth. It's just a good number to have. In the budget, there is a few contingency items for certain things, like some of the items that are hard to, sometimes you can't always gauge, is out-of-district tuition, sometimes is one. And a lot of times that kind of goes hand in hand with transportation, if there's another kid maybe to a different BOCES program or something. So certain things, we have a few contingencies, and because of that, that represents that appropriate fund balance where we give it back. So there's no reserves for those type of expenses, so we build up the budgets for certain areas, some unknowns, and that's kind of the money we give back each year. The comptroller doesn't like large amounts. I think we were creeping on $1 million a while back, which is a lot to say we're just going to have extra in the budget. But right around 1% to 300,000 to me is right where you want to be. Our surplus, just mentioned, we had an unusual year, a very good year with the $1.6 million revenues over expenses. It's typically around 500,000 to 800,000 is the average.
But wasn't that due to COVID and a lot of things?
It still is, yeah. It's been dragging on, but because of that, it's actually been savings to us for different, One of the things, again, the non-COVID things is to tuition. Our out-of-district tuition just happens to be, I don't hate to keep mentioning it, but it's just very low. I know when I started the years, there's several kids, which just it's dropping. Each year I keep thinking it's not going to drop anymore, and we have been. Again, you never know, but it's one of those things, again, it's a big dollar amount sometimes for each student. That's why it's worth it's mentioning, and it's kind of something to look out for. But that was one of the big savings.
Our general fund surplus numbers, starting last year and for the next 2 or 3 years, are going to fluctuate a little bit because a lot of grant money was awarded to us because of COVID. So we replaced costs of technology and different things that we would have been coming out of our budget, and we utilized grant monies for that because they were available and they fit within the allowable usages for technology or for, bringing kids back to school, all these different things that we would have paid for in our budget. And, so we're going to see that over the next couple of years, that number is going to fluctuate up and down a little bit until it gets back to a more steady number. It wouldn't be prudent to say, hey, it was 1.6, let's cut this down, because it was higher due to COVID and due to grant funds that we were given than it normally would have been. Those are going to end, not next year, but the year after. It's a 3-year grant for 1.1 million, and then a 2-year grant for 500,000, Chuck?
Like 560, right?
So
Take it
that,
out of the budget.
I know, but if we have 200, it's our plus then
yeah,
we're going to be in trouble too.
yeah.
It's a fine line.
Yeah, I don't think we'll see this that high this year because we knew these grants were coming, whereas last year we didn't know as much. But, just for the 3-year period, it's going to fluctuate a little bit up and down because of, the $1.6 million in grant money that we're utilizing.
I think that's a number we should endeavor to really explain to the taxpayer, because tripling, everybody's going to just think, I got hammered on my taxes,
Yeah.
why can't you give it back? And
Right.
it's perfectly explainable with COVID, but I think we should probably, if we can earmark that for, we don't have any, we're taking care of the roof and all that, I understand, but perhaps earmark some of that to recoup some of the learning loss and whatnot that was caused by COVID. I mean, if we're gaining this money because of COVID, let's use it to, I'm a broken record, but with the Spanish kids, with their language acquisition and whatnot at the younger grades or whatever, but.
Yeah, like even if you use the surplus at the end of the year for a 1-year shot for the next year. So you know what I mean, to bring something in that
Yeah.
isn't big, that's not going to also have to be carried forward in our budget
Yeah.
going forward. That's kind of what you're talking about, like a 1-year shot as opposed to saying, okay, this is why we have this much extra money. We don't want to take it out of our budget because these expenses are going to come back to us when we run out of grant money, but in the meantime, we're going to use this to do this one shot here, one shot there.
And we've done some of that, so we can
Right.
explain it more,
Right. That's the kind of stuff that is just so hard, because even for us to,
Yeah.
like wrap our heads around it, and then, having other people wrap their heads around it, it's just,
cut, but we know why we're having.
Well, you see a tripling of that, and,
I know.
you know, why is it like that? Why, give me some of that back, but, you know, it makes perfect sense, the explanation, and, you know, we're trying.
And right, to wrap it up, because of our good financial condition, we have a Moody's AA2 rating, which allows us a low interest rate, low borrowings. Our bond is set to end June of 2031. And like I said, just to go in a little more detail again, where our reserves are, because this kind of helps where we need to do anything special budget-wise. So the first column you'll see, compares to 2021, where we ended the year, versus the prior year from June 2020. And then the column all the way to the right is, we have, how much do we have from those reserves as a revenue source to offset the budget, meaning we don't have to collect taxes for that $446,000 total you see. So just kind of quickly go through. I mean, we have our capital reserve, which we discussed. That's for capital projects. Right now, this is just funding the items. We need voter approval if we want to spend it. This is where we took the $2 million out of a couple of years ago to do the construction project. So that we build up again. All these reserves, we comply to the rules and regulations based on each reserve. Our repair reserve, which we just needed, we're going to fund that emergency repair within the next 2 years. We're probably going to be due for a repair reserve hearing, I would think, soon. We haven't had one maybe in about 2 years, right? But those are for the unknown, unforeseen repairs. It helps Mr. Dragone's budget, so he doesn't budget a heavy amount for repairs in the budget. We pay for it through the repair reserve.
So explain then, how is the roof getting paid for, the repair we're doing now? It's coming out of this?
Yes.
But we don't
The
have
emergency one we just did?
to- Right, so we don't have to have a special hearing. for it.
It's a little tricky. There's no hearing because it was an emergency. Normally, we have the hearing, and we have the pot of money, and then it just comes out of it.
Okay.
Right, which
So
we
we're
have
gonna
money.
take- We're gonna take 100 plus out of this reserve this year to pay for this repair reserve.
Actually, what we're going to do, we're going to spend the money out of the pot. Roughly, the pot has about $890,000 in it.
Right,
We have $677,000 available for new projects. So we're going to use that cash to fund the project. But the rule is, it says you should fund the project, the emergency project, backed up in 2 years. So at the end of this June of 2022, in the following year, we're going to, just like we normally fund reserves, all those, we're going to fund that, was it 150? 177. We're going to fund it probably in 1 year, put it back into that reserve, and then we'll be good. Do you follow me? So it's a little tricky, but technically emergency, we could fund it with fund balance. We can spend it. Right now it's approved. The board needs to approve it, which we just did. The funding of it, you could either do with fund balance or fund it within 2 years. So that's what we're going to do.
what if we don't fund it at all, we could leave the bids?
But that's the rule. It has the emergency rules. The only rules you have to fund it within 2 years.
That's the
Emergency.
trade-off.
Emergency,
for not
yeah.
having to have a hearing and all that.
Emergency.
Exactly.
That was my.
If it was just a normal hearing,
Yeah.
it would come out of the,
If we
800,000.
went, we had a hearing and all that stuff, and
We
we
just
wouldn't
give
have to
them
fund
money.
it again.
Right.
We
Okay.
have to fund it back.
I gotcha, okay.
so this year we'll have a separate funding for this is the emergency funding, and this is the normal funding of the repair, and then we'll be good to go. As I mentioned, the TRS reserve, that's a fairly new reserve. We're capped about 2% of salaries that we're building up slowly, and we're starting to use that as a revenue source. And again, just like we have a 5% change in TRS, we're using $100,000 to offset that cost.
So I just want to make sure what the 100,000 offset means, and this goes a little bit to some of your question. That's $100,000 that's being returned to the taxpayers this year to offset the budget.
Right.
Now, that was from surplus from last year, so even though our surplus went up because of COVID and all those things, it still went up. We don't want to remove that money from our budget, because when COVID is gone and everything comes back in fall, we'll need that money in the budget. But we didn't use it, so we're returning portions of it to the taxpayers this year. It's not the full surplus, because, you need to keep money in the bank in case your roof fails and you need $177,000. But that right-hand column there are monies that came from last year's surpluses that we funded these reserves with, that we're now taking out of these reserves and giving back to the taxpayers to offset the money, the budget for this year. So that's what that right-hand column is. So the $100,000, the 170, the 76, and then the total all the way on the bottom, you know, it's about $500,000 that we're returning to, in essence, we're not giving it to the taxpayers, but we're saying the budget, the first $446,000 that we used to pay for the budget is coming from monies that were paid in the past that we didn't use. So that's what that right-hand column is. So, you know, since our reserve, you know, since our surpluses were higher last year, there's money there that goes back.
Okay, right, the next one, which we've had for a while, anybody in the employees' retirement system, we have that reserve. We're using $170,000 in the revenue to offset the cost. Workers' comp has been steady. Say the whole cost, the $76,000, what we get billed each year, that comes out of the reserve.
That's our, like our premium.
That's the premium. Like sometimes there's spikes, again, we might use that reserve when there's unknown to make sure to keep the premium steady. Unemployment's interesting, you know, with the pandemic, a year or two, we bumped the unemployment reserve up, thinking we would have more expenses, which we did, but we actually wound up getting reimbursed very close to after spending the money for unemployment. So right now, it doesn't seem like there's any effect from unemployment, but we're still keeping an eye out. But you understand, we had an increase in unemployment expenses. We had bumped up the reserve, but we actually got reimbursed from the government, from state for it. So again, we'll keep an eye on it, but right now we just have, it's been holding steady. The employee benefit accrued liability reserve is for any payouts when somebody retires for their unused sick or vacation. Same thing, we've been holding steady. We have about 75, 78% of it funded. The $80,000 is what we have as the budget as an estimated expense of, mainly it's say for a teacher retirement, that money is in there where we're basically any kind of retirements, a couple here and there, we pay for it out of the reserve that's been built up.
And this would, the 80,000 will cover the whole expense line on that?
It's an expense line, right?
No, but it will cover the whole
It covers the whole thing, right?
thing for next year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes if there was any unknown, unforeseen, we would probably increase the budget and use the reserve because that's what it's there for.
Right.
So it's nice having that reserve. Again, it's been built up from past savings. Now doesn't cost the taxpayers a dime each year because it's fully funded. And again, if we don't spend the $80,000, we don't reduce it by the 80, and we don't.
Right, you
So,
leave it back in there.
It's just there, yeah.
Gotcha.
You can see just our total reserves last year went from a 10.2 million to 11.3. Usually it is a good sign, but sometimes capital, you know, you have to look at capital because the purpose of capital sometimes when you spend it, like we talked about, the 2 million might go down, so that could be a reason why it goes down. But again, that's a good sign. That's what banks look for. Just a little bit about the tax levy and budget history. So the budget's the blue column, the tax levy is the blue, the budget's the red. Basically, what I want to show is interesting in the last couple of years most of the time we've been under the 2%. This started, the tax cap started in 2012-13. Again, it's kind of interesting that it's been, again, relatively low in my opinion. But like I said, to me, it's just a good check on how things have progressed. Part of what we were allowed to set our tax levy amount at is based on a tax-based growth factor, which is given to us by the state controller. So really have no control over it. You can see over in the past, it's been fluctuating quite a bit, anywhere from up to 1% to as low as, I think it was about 0.3 was the lowest. This year, for next year is relatively low of 0.42. To me, that's the brick and mortar changes in the town. There is a lag, so sometimes I don't know exactly I don't know what properties they represent. It could be people, you know, maybe increase in building an addition or so forth of certain properties. But like I said, that's automatically given to us. And we'll go through, I'll show you the calculation, how much that allows us to increase our tax levy. The Consumer Price Index, CPI, of course, that's usually typical. That's the word that's thrown out. You talk about the tax levy, oh, it's 2%, it's 2%, where a lot of times it's not always 2%. It's capped at 2%, can't go higher. can't go below zero. You can see 1 year in 16, 17, it was very close to zero. Yeah. For next year, we are allowed to go to 2%. I believe CPI right now, I think it was about 4.7%, I thought was roughly where it is now. To me, it's good and bad. I mean, it's doing its job. It is concerning sometimes when our expenses and certain things might grow, like we talked about health insurance, you got the retirement. When those things are going over 5, 6, 7% and we're capped at our revenue, it potentially could be a problem. There's almost not a perfect storm, so to speak, but it's just something it is, things could happen, and it wouldn't be, to me, that outrageous where we would have concerns with the low CPI, low tax growth, and, expenses increasing other way with nothing to offset it. Okay, so this is the tax cap calculation. So the top line, that's our current year tax levy, the $28,106,000. All the way to the bottom, that's our limit to what we can cap the tax levy at with just the set 50% approval rate. So that's the $28,616,000 is based on those different calculations, what we can levy, our tax levy at. So the first line is that tax-based growth factor, which we talked about. So that bumps it up $118,000. The prior year capital cost is the capital cost, which is our bond indebtedness offset by building aid. That's because it's a separate factor, meaning it was already voted on when the voters approved the bond. So that just automatically comes out of the calculation. So it comes out, the 737 is what we had, put down for last year. And to jump down below, the current capital cost, the bond indebtedness for next year is the $764,000. Then it goes back up because of those items. So like I said, those were already voter approved, so it comes out of the tax levy. It's not affected by it, but we need to raise the money for the bonds. In the middle is the 2% for the CPI, so that allows us the levy to go up $549,000. Now the big new item this year is the pilot receivable, which you see in red, the minus $184,000. So I'm actually going to get the normally pilot, which is my payment in lieu of taxes, is something where we receive a separate, I'll say wire, instead of, doesn't come through taxes, it comes through a separate check. So it comes out of the calculation because, again, it will come in as a separate check for us. Now, in the past, we've had pilot, it was roughly $20,000. And most of the time, it's usually a multi-year contract and different amount each year, and then after the 10 years, it comes off. For $20,000, a lot of times it was in the calculation, but it's not much of a big deal. $184,000 is quite a bit. Now, the tricky part is there's no contract for the amount yet. It's a court order. So let's see what I'm going to say. It's based on a court decision which transferred certain properties owned by LIPA to the wholly exempt portion of our assessment roll. So properties owned by LIPA, which they pay taxes on and would be part of the levy, they became exempt. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure which properties it is. It's the town of Southold. So we're affected. It's Greenport, it's Mattituck that they're affected. So we actually received that check for this year, $184,000.
Is it specific to each zip code or school district? Like
It's
the
specific
pilot?
for our district, right?
Okay,
So
so Mattituck and Green, they don't
They get
affect
their own.
our pilot.
So who sends us the check?
the town just
So
deals
sends
with
us
it.
the check, and they're telling us that because they gave us this 184, we have to take it out of our calculation. That's pretty much.
Because they gave us the money, right? They
Right.
don't have to levy it,
Right. They don't have to make it, so.
but yet it lowers our tax levy.
Right, gotcha.
So normally you see our tax levy increase is 1.82%. Without the pilot, if nothing happened with pilot, our levy would be 2.4%.
Okay.
So it gives the taxpayers a break that first year. It's tricky at the end of the term when it comes off, that it's the opposite where we'll have an increase
Right.
because now we need to raise it back in the tax levy. So it's out of our control. I know I've seen in Nassau County a while ago, districts sometimes when you're dealing with, I think it was the mall, it's like, it could be, if it's millions of dollars, it's a huge issue tax cap-wise, for tax levy purposes.
So Shoreham.
Like Shoreham.
Shoreham High School.
Right.
When the power plant came off,
That was good, it was
that
really
was a
good.
huge hit. Ours, Chuck and I already started, talking about, trying to figure out how to offset at the end. Because just adding it back in, raises your levy.
Can you offset it with your reserves?
A reserve?
Yeah.
I'm looking into the one, because that's the money we have this year, 21, 22. We didn't budget for it, we didn't, so it's added money, and that, I'm pretty sure I'm going to reserve it
Yeah.
and use it next year.
We're gonna take this year's 184, and we're gonna use it next year, so it'll get us through we'll have a full year when it's going to end to know how to offset it. And then you can offset it by figuring out where some of your surplus came from and adjusting it to that, or putting in reserve and adjusting, but yeah. We're going to use this year's money, we're not gonna spend this year's money this year.
You're gonna put it FICO.
Gonna put it for next
Right.
year.
Aside.
Since we're being shorted 184,000.
Right.
They gave us a check for 180,000. We're just gonna apply this year's to next year.
Right.
And then we'll apply next year's to the year after, and so on and so forth. And then we're hoping that that number is lower at the end of the term. Ideally, some of the properties will drop off before others, because then we can make it up within our budget annually without it being a big hit. But the hard part is, we don't know what properties it is. We don't know anything about it. We just know that we get a letter that says, this is the amount, and along with the check. So we'll, over the next handful of years, plan for it. But we'll always be 1 year ahead, so that we have ample planning time yet. That's the goal.
Okay, and like I said, the change is the 1.82%. Any questions? As of now, the tax billing, I called the town, the average house is assessed, the estimated tax increase with the budget we're presenting would be $117 per year. Again, that's the increase in taxes based on the house at $7,000. If you want to figure it out yourself, it's $93.862 per $100 of assessed valuation. This estimated increase would be $1.672 per $100 of assessed valuation. And each year, I base these numbers on the assessed valuation as of December 21. This happens to be the first year, the assessed valuation in December 20, where it actually went down. Since I've been here, the valuation has gone up, which typically means every time I do this estimate, when the real bills come in, it was lower than what we projected. So because the assessed valuation, I think, went down a couple $100,000, it just causes now the assessment to be slightly higher, because again, we have no control over the valuation. We just say this is the levy that we need, but it's interesting that, again, it's the first time the valuation went down. A little bit on state aid, which, and again, Dr. Moore and I even talked about, and we don't know if it's going to be sustainable, but in the current governor's budget, overall state increase of $2 billion for all state aids. Our portion of it, especially the foundation aid, is projected to increase 3% or $39,193.
So what does that give us a total foundation aid
What do you mean?
amount? What's the total then of our foundation aid at this point?
I'll break it out. I'll show you. It's
Oh, all right, you
Well,
don't
we
do
do
that.
yeah.
Okay, all right.
But what's interesting in there, again, there's other expense-driven aids that I'm projecting some lowering amounts, so say like for BOCES or certain amounts. But the foundation aid, typically, that's the set standard portion, the one that doesn't seem, so that's good. Overall, it's going to go up roughly to $39,000. As we mentioned, again, the other funding streams, which is not part of the budget, is the American Rescue Plan and I call it the Carissa for the $524,000. Again, that's just to make sure the kids get back, what's the word for anything to get them back, any kind of learning loss, anything to help them. And again, we're using for everything that it's supposed to be used for. So we have the budget set up. It's tracked separately in the special aid fund. And like I said, it's been a reason why some of our regular budget's been lower, that we have had savings. So I have two slides on the revenue, some detail lines. Again, I'm not necessarily going through each one, but so the column, the 22-23 is the proposed budget. You have the 21-22 budget next to it, the current budget that we're in, the change, and the percent change. As you see, the tax levy, you mentioned that's going to project to go up 1.81%. So here's pilot. Next year is the budget. Like I said, we received a check for it. That's a kind of direct offset for that tax levy line. State aid, as we just talked about, it's going up to $36,000 and change. Again, the bulk of it, it's the foundation increase. We have revenue for a shared service for our facilities person, staying the same. Shared sports, again, I expect it to be a little more than $20,000, but I've been keeping it flat, especially now that the sports are back in the full swing of things. We should be able to get a better idea what the revenue. That's based on the actual enrollment in the sports that we host. And like I said, we'll keep an eye on that. The NJ, their ROTC program, bumped it up a little bit, so that's the money we collect from the other schools that are involved with the Mattituck and the Greenport program. For their share, again, it's based on the enrollment driven. And we bill them for everything less the federal monies that you see, the $135,000 we get from the government. Tuition. So what I'm doing here, you can see the budget went from $220,000 to $201,000. I'm trying to be less reliant on tuition because I think that was kind of the guidance I was given. We currently have about 17 students, which is quite high from what it's normally it's in 10, 11. But like I said, we've lowered it to tuition, where again, not to be reliable on that tuition revenue, where it comes in.
I'm sorry, where are they from? I know they're New Suffolk, but not that many from New Suffolk, is it?
Yeah, we have, I believe we may have a couple of Greenport students in some of our special programs.
Right.
But they don't have. But mostly New Suffolk is the majority. Yeah, I mean, Chuck says that is the highest number they've ever had. And that's why I don't want to budget at the number that we had this year, because it's unusually high.
It is. But there are probably people who, some of them moved out
Right.
and they send their kids back. So you're right, yeah, it's a good thing to be conservative.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, because I tried to track what you would think sometimes, okay, who are the kids graduating, called up, what's the incoming class? And it changes, there's just, if there's 10th graders in 1 year, and the next year it could be 6, and could be, it's quite a bit of changes for a relatively small number, so it's kind of.
Imagine more changes in the past couple of years just because of what's been going on,
Oh, is that right? Okay.
With
Right.
COVID and people coming out to their second homes, maybe, that may be part of it, new kids that we didn't have before.
True,
I
right.
don't know. Or people moving out here because of that. just to-
Right, yeah, that's actually right.
It'd be interesting to know how many of them were like new students total, not because they were 7th graders, but
Right.
new students to the district from, let's say, New Suffolk for the past 2 years,
Right.
that weren't here prior. I don't know if that has anything.
Right, that's back, I can say, right, there's definitely has been a couple in each grade. Again, in the past, it wasn't more than like, say, 12, so I think there's a couple definitely new.
Right, so that would be part of it.
Interesting, right. Appropriate fund balance we talked about, we used to reserves, again, a slight increase. Miscellaneous, we're just trying to be more accurate. One of the main bulks dropped is the interest revenue. We've just, interest rates have just been so low, that's the bulk of the drop in that. So that's just kind of aligned the budget more, to reality. And it's refund prior years, there's certain expenses, it's E-rate monies in there, BOCES gives back us money. A lot of very hard, not necessarily where you can estimate exactly what it will be. Again, interest is just that you can kind of judge. And then total revenue budget, which of course equals our expenditure budget, is the $32,233,000, an increase of the 1.99%. I'm not going to go through, it looks a little hard to see, but yeah, this is kind of talks about, which we do follow all the different purposes, rules and regulations for each reserve, which we, of course, we follow, and we follow our own policy and procedures on it. Some dates, we have next week, as I mentioned, is the admin presentation. We'll go a little more in detail the expense side of the budget. April 13th is another budget meeting. The date's a little early this year to adopt the budget on that April 13th because the next board meeting would be too late. Like I said, that's, again, right now we're projected to adopt it on April 13th, and the budget vote is May 17th. So that's all I have. Of course, any questions?
Will we get a breakdown of the budget at some point?
I'm sorry?
Will we get a breakdown of the budget at some point?
Sure.
Line by
Detail?
line. Yeah.
Okay.
When will you have line by line?
As I mentioned, yeah, it was a very easy, actually went very smooth.
You have the line by line done now?
Yes.
Good, so then I can send it to you in front of that.
And can we get the administrators before their presentation next week, so if we have any questions or not?
Yeah. And you,
For next,
when do you think you'll have some money?
well, that's where sometimes they wait till the last minute.
I'm thinking of them, I don't like to.
Yeah, I mean, even if we could see what they're going to say, you know, just so.
Yet?
I'll push to get all the numbers and
Just in case we have any questions,
Yeah.
Frank can say as far as,
absolutely.
I don't want to put them on the spot.
Yeah, I understand. So I'll work on that, Chuck. We'll try to work on getting that put together tomorrow, Friday.
Okay.
So we can send it out.
Yeah, make a note.
Thank you, Chuck.
Very informative.
Thank you, Chuck.
Okay, you're welcome.
So he's got this.
I guess that's it, right?
That is it.
Anybody have any questions? I guess we need a motion to adjourn, please. Thank you, Chuck, that was very informative, very well done, thank you.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed to adjourning? Okay, then.